Slavic mythology is a rich world filled with gods, spirits, monsters, and supernatural beings that played a key role in the lives of the ancient Slavs. These beings were often closely connected to nature, whether mountains, forests, bodies of water, or atmospheric phenomena, and many of them possessed a dark, even terrifying character. Alongside the worship of gods such as Svarog and Perun, the Slavs also believed in spirits like the Poludnica or the Leshy, who represented the forces of nature, sometimes hostile, sometimes protective. Stories about these beings formed orally transmitted traditions, which were later influenced by Christianity and partially transformed into folklore. In this video, we will take a detailed look at the monsters of Slavic mythology and explore their powers, appearance, traditions, and cultural influence. The Leshy is a spirit of the forest and hunting who possesses the remarkable ability to change his size and assume virtually any form. Most often, however, he appears as an old man with long white hair and beard, small horns and claws, and a body covered in fur. In his native forest, the Leshy is as tall as the trees themselves, but once he crosses its borders, he shrinks to the size of grass. His eyes glow green, just like his hair and fur, and beneath the fur his skin is rough like tree bark. Some legends portray the Leshy as an evil deity who delights in deceiving people and leading them to their doom, luring them off paths, causing them to get lost, starve, or drown in swamps. The Leshy is also known for abducting children, especially girls, whom he violates in the forest and returns to their families only after a long time. Like the cuckoo, the Leshy is a brood parasite and replaces his own children with human ones. These changeling children are foolish and insatiable, and at the age of 12 they flee back into the forest. The Leshy can transform into various animals, most notably a bear, wolf, hare, or a red rooster. His main role is to guard the forest, where he does not tolerate with thieves, whistling, or loud shouting. The Witcher series was inspired by the Leshy and created the Leshy, a powerful and dangerous forest spirit with a terrifying appearance, featuring a deer skull instead of a head. The Leshy can manipulate nature and summon and control forest creatures such as wolves and crows to fight those who violate its woodland domain. The Poludnica is often depicted as a female demon or apparition that appears at noon, when the sun shines the brightest. In some versions of the legends, she's described as a tall, pale woman with long hair, dressed in white robes. Other versions portray her as an old, thin woman, or even as a skeleton. It was believed that the Poludnica punished those who violated the midday rest period, especially people working in the fields during the greatest heat. She punished them with madness, heat stroke, or even death. In folk beliefs, she represents a warning against exhaustion and overheating during hot summer days. According to some versions of the legends, the Poludnica is the soul of an unmarried woman or a woman who died tragically on her wedding day. This aspect connects her with themes of unfulfilled love and tragic destiny, which are common motifs in mythology and folklore. The Czech poem Poludnica by Karel Joma Urban is based on these folk beliefs and tells the story of a desperate mother who calls upon the Poludnica to discipline her disobedient child. The Poludnica truly appears, and the situation escalates into a tragic ending that reflects the dark and moral dimension of this myth. In folk stories, the Klekenis is often portrayed as a terrifying figure whose role was primarily connected to threatening disobedient children. This function aligns with similar figures in various folkloric traditions, such as the Poludnica, which serve as moral lessons or warnings. Klekeny was the traditional bell ringing that sounded 3 times a day, in the morning, at noon, and in the evening. In the past, when people did not have clocks, this sound served as a time signal and a reminder of regular daily activities: rising in the morning, stopping work for lunch at noon, and returning home in the evening. The ringing was also connected with prayer, usually known as the Angelus. In some villages, this tradition is still maintained today. Klekeny also had significance in folk superstitions. Children were told that if they disobeyed, they might encounter the Klekenis, a frightening being who appeared as an old woman in torn clothes, carrying a wooden staff. This creature was meant to punish disobedient children who dared to stay outside after the evening bell ringing. In the past, when homes were lit only by candles, people often told stories about supernatural beings and spirits before going to sleep. The Klekenis was one of these terrifying figures, feared not only by children but also by adults. Children believed she could capture them outside and carry them away in a sack, so they would rush home whenever they heard the sound of the bells. The Klekenis continues to appear in many stories and legends to this day. The domovoi has its roots in ancient times, when Slavs believed that every home had its own guardian spirit. In appearance, he resembles a small old man with thick hair and often a beard, and he can sometimes manifest as a shadow or even as an animal, most commonly a cat, dog, or snake. In some traditions, he was also identified with the soul of the first deceased family member in a new home, connecting him to ancestor worship. The purpose of the domovoi's existence was to protect the family and its property. He was responsible for maintaining harmony, health, and prosperity in the household. If he was pleased with the family, he rewarded them with protection, gave them advice and warnings about approaching dangers, and cared for their children and domestic animals, which he loved dearly. His satisfaction depended on how the family treated him and how well they kept the household in order. It was common to bring him small offerings, such as bread or milk. However, if the domovoi felt ignored or displeased, he could become hostile and cause various disturbances in the household. Typical signs of his anger included making strange noises, knocking over dishes, or even tormenting domestic animals, which is paradoxical, since animals were usually his favorites. In extreme cases, the domovoi could leave the house entirely, which was considered a very bad omen, as the family would lose its protection and misfortune would begin to follow them. When a family moved into a new home, it was important to bring the domovoi with them. This was done through a ritual in which fire from the hearth of the old home was symbolically transferred to the new one, ensuring that the spirit would continue protecting the family in their new dwelling. Another custom involved asking the domovoi for advice or signs, especially before important events such as weddings or the birth of a child. People believed the domovoi could predict the future, both good and bad. The domovoi was not the only household spirit in Slavic mythology. Every type of building or space had its own spirit. Ovinik guarded the barn, Bannik watched over the bathhouse, and Dvorovoi protected the courtyard. Each of these spirits had a specific character, and it was important to treat them properly. The Ruzorka is a fascinating and mysterious being in Slavic mythology, often associated with water spirits. Originally, the Ruzorka was perceived as a nature spirit or fertility goddess who brought fertility to the land by watering the fields. Over time, however, her image changed, from a benevolent protector of nature to a much darker figure. The Ruzorka is usually depicted as a beautiful but tragic being, often associated with women who drowned or were drowned as a result of unhappy love. According to legend, these women transformed into rusalkas after death, and their souls came to inhabit bodies of water such as rivers and lakes. There, they lured men into the depths with their otherworldly beauty, tangled their legs with their long hair, and dragged them beneath the surface. They then waited until the victim drowned, or in some cases, tickled him to death while laughing at his suffering. Some also believed that rusalkas could change their appearance to match the preferences of the men they intended to seduce. Rusalkas have long hair, most often reddish in color, in which their power is concentrated, and by combing it they can even cause floods. In art and literature, rusalkas have been portrayed in many different ways. For example, in Russian fairy tales and in music, especially in Dvorak's opera Ruzorka, the water spirit appears as a tragic figure longing for love that the mortal world cannot provide. Her story emphasizes deeper themes, not only love, but also betrayal, death, and reflections on the afterlife. This transforms the Ruzorka into a complex character with many interpretations rather than a simple monster. This diversity of portrayals reflects the complex nature of the Ruzorka myth, which contains both elements of beauty and fertility as well as darkness and destruction. The Kikimora is a household spirit living behind the stove or in the cellar and is often associated with disorder and chaos in the home. She can be either a good or evil spirit, depending primarily on the behavior of the household's inhabitants. If the house is dirty and neglected, the Kikimora becomes active and begins to torment the residents, whistling, breaking dishes, making nighttime noises resembling rustling or gnawing mice, tangling yarn, and purring at night, which is considered an omen of misfortune. The Kikimora is also associated with sleep paralysis, a condition in which a person experiences an inability to move while falling asleep or waking up. In this interpretation, she sits on the sleeper's chest and tries to strangle them, a motif commonly found in Russian and other Slavic legends. However, if the household is kept clean and orderly, the Kikimora becomes its protector, helping with small domestic tasks and caring for chickens and animals. There are two main types of Kikimora, one originating from the forest, married to the domovoi, and another from the swamps, married to the Leshy. The forest Kikimora has a less malicious nature, while the swamp Kikimora is described as a sinister and terrifying being who can abduct children and lure travelers into getting lost. The Kikimora may have a dog's snout, a chicken's beak, or resemble a goat-like creature with glowing eyes and horns. She has the ability to change her form, whether human or animal, but she is always female. Most often, she appears as an old woman or a beautiful young girl, sometimes even as a deceased family member, which can lead to deeply disturbing situations. The swamp Kikimora is usually described as a small, ugly, hunched, thin, and dirty old woman with a sharp nose and tangled hair, dressed in moss and grass. Baba Yaga is one of the most iconic figures of Slavic mythology, representing the archetype of the witch with deep roots in folktales and fairy stories. She is traditionally described as an old, wrinkled woman with a long nose, bony fingers, and often a single iron tooth that gives her a terrifying appearance. She lives deep in the forest in a hut that stands on chicken legs and can rotate 360 degrees. This hut is often surrounded by a fence made of human bones, which further emphasizes its some nature. The entrance to the hut is often accessible only to those who know a special spell or understand how to properly enter Baba Yaga's dwelling. In Slavic mythology, Baba Yaga plays a dual role. On one hand, she is a dangerous and evil being who devours children and spreads destruction. Many fairy tales depict her as a figure who abducts innocent children into her hut, where she then cooks them in a cauldron. On the other hand, Baba Yaga often fulfills the role of a guardian or helper who tests a hero's courage and wisdom. If the hero succeeds in her trials, Baba Yaga frequently provides valuable advice or magical object that helps him on his journey. Baba Yaga is not just an ordinary witch, she is a master of magic and sorcery. She possesses a wide range of magical abilities, including divination, control over natural forces, and flight, most often using a mortar as her means of transportation. Symbolically, she represents a transition between worlds, between the world of the living and the dead, between childhood and adulthood. Her hut on chicken legs stands on the boundary between these worlds, making her a guardian of secrets and gateways to other dimensions. In some interpretations, Baba Yaga is associated with Mother Earth or with nature itself, which has the power both to give and to take life. Legends also say that if you kill her dog, you'll meet a very bad fate. Poludnica is a mysterious being in Slavic mythology, closely associated with fields and agriculture. This spirit, often depicted as a small old man with dark, earthy skin and dressed in white or grey clothing, has a deep connection to farmland and its crops. His influence can be both positive and negative, depending on how people treat him. Poludnica is perceived as the guardian of fields and crops, overseeing harvests and agricultural labor. He is known for his strictness and often punishes those who behave improperly toward the land, violate rituals, or work in the fields at inappropriate times, especially at noon, when the fields are under his special protection. Poludnica may then take revenge by driving people away, causing illness, or even killing them. He despises the lazy and drunkards, and those he finds sleeping in the fields he strangles in their sleep. On the other hand, A happy and satisfied Polvik can bring abundant harvests and protect fields from harmful influences. To gain his favor, people traditionally offered him 2 eggs, an old rooster that no longer crows, a toad, and a crow. These offerings were placed in a ditch in the fields at dawn, when no one could see Polvik. With the arrival of Christianity, Polvik became more of a frightening figure, used by parents to scare children into avoiding fields and not playing there, for fear that they might get lost or injured. Nevertheless, Polvik remains an important part of Slavic folklore, reflecting ancient agricultural traditions and belief in the connection between natural forces and everyday human life. The werewolf has deep roots in pre-Christian pagan traditions, in which wolves held a special place in Slavic culture. On one hand, these predators were admired for their strength and endurance. On the other, they were deeply feared. In this context, the werewolf became a symbol of wild and uncontrollable natural forces that can erupt within any human being. Transformation into a werewolf is often associated with a curse that may be brought upon a person who has committed a grave sin or violated natural laws. In other cases, the ability to transform is hereditary, passed down from generation to generation. In human form, a werewolf may appear completely ordinary, but once transformed, it becomes a dangerous and uncontrollable creature with extraordinary strength and savagery. Stories of werewolves appear across various Slavic traditions, serving as cautionary tales about the dangers of uncontrolled power and violence. In some stories, the werewolf symbolizes the dark side of human nature, while others emphasize the importance of self-control and moral discipline. Werewolves in Slavic mythology are not always portrayed as purely evil. In some tales, they can be defeated and overcome, often through faith or intelligence, suggesting that even the darkest forces can ultimately be conquered. This figure has survived into modern popular culture, where it appears in films, books, and video games, often as a symbol of humanity's inner conflict between civilization and wilderness. In the Czech lands, the first written mentions of werewolves date back to the 14th century, but the oldest written records of people transforming into wolves come from ancient Greece. The historian Herodotus, in his histories from the 5th century BCE, mentions the tribe of the Nuri living in northeastern Scythia, whose members were said to transform into wolves for several days each year. Dodola, also known as Peruna, is the goddess of rain and the wife of the god Perun. Her role includes not only bringing rain, but also fertility and the renewal of nature. While the thunder god Perun represented power, strength, and celestial forces, his wife Dodola, who brought rain, served as a counterbalance to his destructive abilities. Their relationship symbolized harmony between these powerful natural forces. The Slavs believed that the sky and clouds above them were cows that Dodola milked, which is why rain fell to the earth. When spring arrived, it was said that Dodola flew over fields and forests, decorating tree crowns with fruit and blossoms. Dodola also became part of traditional festivals and rituals in the Balkans that honored natural cycles and ensured good harvests. The girls who participated in these ceremonies were often orphans in the past, and their clothing made of branches and greenery symbolized new beginnings and renewal. The ceremonies included singing, dancing, and rituals meant to bring rain and fertility, as well as visiting every house in the village, where the girls stopped at each doorway and the hosts poured water over them. This custom symbolized the celebration of rain, the rebirth of nature in spring, and fertility. The vampire, or Upia in Slavic mythology, is one of the most famous and terrifying beings found throughout the myths of Eastern Europe. Although it shares many traits with Western vampire traditions, it also differs in important ways. In Slavic belief, the vampire is primarily a being that returns from the world of the dead to feed on the blood of the living, but its nature and behavior can vary widely. Traditionally, a vampire was often associated with an unclean death, such as dying without proper burial, suicide, or death resulting from evil deeds. A foundational belief in Eastern European vampire lore was the idea that a person could possess 2 souls or 2 hearts, one of which was evil. After death, This evil part would dominate and cause the person to transform into a vampire. This vampire would then threaten its loved ones, drain their blood, and spread disease. Slavic folklore contains many different types of vampires. In Polish tradition, for example, there is a vampire known as the Leshy, who is born with the destiny of becoming a vampire. After death, this type of vampire returns to consume its own body first, and then threatens its family. In other Slavic regions, there are mythical beings such as the Leshy, who is said to be able to kill with a single glance from a church tower. One of the most fascinating aspects of Slavic vampire belief is the burial rituals designed to prevent the dead from becoming vampires. These included practices such as placing coins in the mouth of the deceased, putting a cross under the tongue, or burying the body face down. These rituals were meant to ensure that the vampire would be unable to rise from the grave and threaten the living. In the literature and culture of Slavic nations, the vampire plays a significant role. The Polish poet Adam Mickiewicz often addressed vampire themes in his works, viewing them as symbolic representations of the dark side of the human soul. For him and many other authors, vampires were not only mythical beings, but also metaphors for the evil that can lurk within every human being. These elements show that belief in vampires held deep cultural and spiritual significance for Slavic peoples and was an inseparable part of their mythological and religious worldview. Kuma represents the plague or the Black Death in Serbian folk tradition, where she is depicted as deathly pale woman with long white hair and flowing white robes. In one hand she carries a staff made of birch wood, and in the other a pair of scissors with which she cuts a person's thread of life. Despite being a sinister figure, it was believed that her presence meant a peaceful death, as she would give the deceased her staff to help them on their journey to the underworld of Nav. During times of plague, there were very few ways to avoid Kuma, as the spread of disease was constant. However, people believed that cleaning their homes, which in reality truly helped, or offering Kuma food, clean water, basil, and a comb could protect them from illness. In another version of the story, Kuma appears as a terrifying old woman, characterized by unkempt hair and large eyes. She appears only at night and carries a ceramic bowl filled with arrows, which she uses to kill people she encounters, symbolizing her power to spread death and disease. The dragon is a legendary magical creature that appears in the folklore and mythologies of many cultures around the world. These beings vary greatly depending on regional Slavic traditions, but they share several common features. Dragons are often described as enormous, serpentine creatures with wings and the ability to breathe fire. They are frequently perceived as embodiments of natural forces that can be both destructive and protective. Their appearance often includes elements of other animals, such as ram horns, fish tails, or snake bodies. This connects them to folk beliefs in which certain animals, after reaching a certain age, could transform into dragons. Dragons possess the ability to change shape and even transform into humans, allowing them to blend unnoticed among people. This shape-shifting makes them dangerous seducers, who often lure young women and father children with them. Children who then possess supernatural abilities, especially superhuman strength. In Slavic mythology, there are several types of dragons, each with specific traits and roles in stories. The Zeme is one of the most frequently mentioned dragon types in South Slavic traditions, especially in Serbia, Bulgaria, and the Balkans. These dragons are often three-headed, six-headed, or even 12-headed and are associated with destructive forces such as storms, lightning, and drought. Although Zmes are generally perceived as evil beings, in some stories they also appear as protectors and allies of heroes. Another famous Slavic dragon is the Smok Wawelski, the legendary dragon of Polish folklore, also known as the Warel dragon. The story takes place in Krakow, where the dragon terrorized the local population until a clever shoemaker defeated it using bait made of sheep's meat stuffed with sulfur. This story emphasizes not only strength, but also cleverness as a key quality in overcoming evil. Chudo-Yudo is another dragon, usually three-headed, appearing in Russian byliny, heroic epic poems, where it serves as an adversary to the Bogatars. It is often associated with dark forces and the underworld and must be defeated by a hero in order for light and justice to be restored. Dragons in Slavic mythology often symbolize chaos, destruction, and dark forces, but they can also embody natural powers that are unpredictable and mighty, though not always evil. Many stories focus on the struggle between these forces and human heroes, who must overcome the dragon in order to achieve victory or salvation. And that concludes our entire selection from the Slavic bestiary of legendary monsters. Which one fascinated you the most? Which ones did we not mention? And which would you add? Write to us in the comments.